Hello and welcome to the 2.1 cast. I'm your host, Neil Murray, and I'm joined by Andrew Southwick. Andrew, how are you doing?
I'm good. Life is good. I got myself a perfect draft machine, and anyone who has a perfect draft machine knows that your life changes for the better. So, do you want me to talk about it? I can talk for a few minutes and tell the listeners all about it if you want.
I mean, tell you what, let's see how much time we've got left at the end, and if we're running short, then that's when you can talk about it. Slash, you can maybe do your newsletter on it. Stefan, have you got a perfect draft machine, and are you feeling just as good as Andrew?
I'm feeling very well. I do not have a perfect draft machine. I'd like to remind listeners that we're not sponsored by the perfect draft machine, so let's stop talking about the perfect draft machine, please.
Not yet, we're not. Yeah. Well, let's just get straight into football and matters. And it's been a busy couple of days, which I'm sure you guys will both know if you've been living under a rock, which is probably the only way you won't have heard this news. The kind of 12 clubs who have been threatening to form this European Super League have finally made good on their threats and promises, or whatever you want to call it, and on Sunday night announced that would be what is happening. They intend to quote, intend to commence as soon as practical, really. So I don't think it'll be this coming season, but it could be the following season, depending on how all these chats go. But they seem determined to do it. So basically, it's a midweek competition to rival the Champions League, but it's a closed league where these 12 clubs will be taking part every season. It'll actually be made up of 20 teams. 15 teams will be there every year, and the other 5 will qualify each year. We don't know how that'll be decided yet. It could be through absolutely anything. It's all kind of whispers at the moment. Unsurprisingly, this has been condemned by pretty much absolutely everybody: politicians, football and governing bodies, leagues, pundits, fans. Everyone's been kind of getting the boot in, unsurprisingly. UEFA have said that they would ban players involved in these clubs doing the Super League from not just domestic leagues, but the likes of the Champions League and FIFA Club World Cup, and also ban them for representing their national teams, which would also be terrible news for Scotland, but good news for Greg Taylor potentially. Let's just kind of get straight into it. It's just been a bit of a mental couple of days, because we'll also touch on the fact that we've now a new Champions League format that's going to come into play in a couple of years. But starting with the European Super League, Stefan, just your general thoughts, and I guess how is this going to impact Scottish football and football as a whole?
I mean, I'm sure Andrew will probably laugh when I say this, but it's nothing short of Armageddon, in my opinion. This. I mean, honestly, there's no kind of hyperbole. That is hype. There's nothing you can say that is hyperbole for this. It's a selection of the biggest clubs in the world trying to rip themselves out of the current structure. They plan on basically, destroying the competition and the sport as we know it. I thought it was actually really telling. It was a really good piece actually in Sky Sports when I can't remember what part of the show it was. It was on like a 24-hour channel, and one of the presenters was kind of talking about one of the sources he has is on a board as a board member of one of these 6 English clubs, and he was kind of talking through the things that this guy was telling him from the owner of one of the club that this guy's a board member of. Because as far as I can tell from the reporting down south, this is the whole concept of this has been kind of pushed by the American owners of the English clubs, and your Spanish and your Italian clubs have kind of jumped on board because they're looking at pretty worrying revenue sheets right now after the pandemic and things. So it's really something that's kind of the brainchild of, the Glazers, John Henry at Liverpool, and a few other ones down south. And some of the things they were just talking about, he was saying things like how they don't understand the concept of relegation. They don't know why a football club like Manchester United would agree to be part of a system that could see them get relegated and therefore miss out on TV revenue. They were talking about their absolute bafflement at the idea of international football. Why would they give up their athletes that they pay a fortune to go play for another team that they make no money from themselves? And there's a few other things. And as I was reading this, I was like, this isn't just a case of kind of, like some pragmatic owners or chief executives trying to kind of mold a competition to kind of make more money for themselves, or it's not even like maybe Celtic and Rangers kind of flirting or winking at the English Premier League because like, oh, if we played in that league it'd be more money than this league. it's a group of American investors who have absolutely no idea how football works, and they're literally trying to strong arm it and wrestle it into a competition that, or not even a competition, a format that means that they can kind of close the back door and make sure that, the franchises, because that's what they'll become, the franchises that they own will never cease to make money. The obvious comparison here is with the NFL, which, every franchise owns a stake in. There's no relegation in it. The team who finishes bottom of their conference makes about 90% of the money that the team that finishes and wins the Super Bowl. So it really doesn't matter who wins these things every year. I'm not trying to dunk on American football or anything like that, but from a spreadsheet point of view, it doesn't really matter who wins the Super Bowl most years. In terms of how this actually impacts Scottish football, the Super League in particular, I honestly think it accelerates the demise of Scottish football. I really mean it as it being that serious. If the Super League goes ahead, it'll destroy the Premier League, it'll destroy the Champions League, it'll probably destroy UEFA as we know it. There won't be a secondary competition, there won't be a Europa League, there won't be a Europa Conference League, there won't be solidarity payments that UEFA pay out to not Celtic and Rangers. We've made this argument before whenever people moan about, oh, who needs a Champions League? I'm so sick of Celtic and Rangers making us money. They conveniently ignore that clubs like Motherwell, Aberdeen, whoever else, they make six-figure sums in some seasons from solidarity payments from Scotland's coefficient standing in Europe. All that's gone. And these super clubs as well, because they'll be making so much money. I mean, the figures quoted about £400 million a year. Is not only will the squads they own double in size, so they'll be hoarding even more than they already do, like the likes of Chelsea, who they maybe got a squad of 23, but they've probably got 30 really good players on their books on loan at the minute. Not only will you have squads of this size, but you'll have all the best players. And you can maybe argue, like, okay, great, Premier League already does that, but it also means there'll be such a huge poverty for anyone outside of that competition. There'll be no safety net for Scottish football as there is right now at UEFA. And I'm not sitting here trying to argue that everything's kind of, rosy and we live in the land of milk and honey. The current setup doesn't work very well for Scottish football either. Trickle down economics is a myth in football, as I think is in economics in general. The current process certainly isn't helping Scottish football right now. But this Super League, if it comes into action as it's proposed, will destroy the entire structure that Scottish football is part of, and the money that we currently make from it. And we would be completely cut off. I mean, I know the BBC are maybe being polite and suggesting Celtic and Rangers might be part of this. There's no chance that Celtic and Rangers are going to be part of this. We like to think the Celtic and Rangers are huge worldwide clubs. They don't even make a blip on the radar compared to these clubs down south and compared to Real Madrid, Bayern Munich, Barcelona. No one cares about Celtic and Rangers. They're not going to be in the Super League. And any idea that we might have one or two teams in this competition and the rest of Scottish football can kind of huddle around the money that Celtic and Rangers make from this, it's not going to happen. So, I honestly think it's the equivalent of maybe just someone just pulling the lever and pulling the lights off for European football. And I mean, I know you'll have a lot of people on Twitter and stuff, seen a few articles and stuff about it. I'm sure maybe Andrew maybe shares his opinion. I know Ewan, for example, when we talked in the group chat, he kind of swings this way too, that Scottish football is already kind of one degree of separation away from the bright lights of European football. We don't even really need European football. Who cares? I mean, I've even had Celtic fans tell me that they don't care about this thing, even though Celtic didn't have the Champions League, or at least the ambition of playing for Champions League. That's basically half of what your season ticket's meant to amount to when you buy a season ticket every season. So I understand a lot of Scottish fans would probably just read this news and be like, oh, who cares? Let these big clubs go eat themselves. But I really do think if it came to pass, and hopefully I don't think it will, but I really do think it would accelerate, the demise of Scottish football, and it would really cut off a lot of the money that currently comes into the division that your average football fans probably not widely aware of.
Yeah, I mean, before I throw to you, Andrew, just a couple of things, Stefan, about that kind of NFL model. You can tell that it's the kind of American owners, the US-owned Premier League clubs in particular, really want it to be that closed league where, like, kind of star MVP players. But I've also kind of heard from some kind of senior journalists as well I've seen that it's also other clubs are saying it's more to do with leverage over UEFA, and they're still not happy despite this new Champions League format, that they're getting enough money. And actually this new format, which we'll get to later in the podcast, means money will be shared among more clubs. So I think it's a mix of, from what I can see, these kind of owners wanting this US model, but then other people are really just doing it to stick it to UEFA, basically, which isn't really a great reason to, I don't know, make such a seismic change. Just in your comments about how it could affect Scottish football, and I mean, what you've outlined there, it's obviously the worst case scenario in terms of it, what it would do to UEFA and other European competitions. Do you not think there's a chance, though, it could maybe... Yeah, obviously it's going to affect these other competitions financially, and yeah, it might affect those payments, but is there also an argument to say that these competitions could survive and they would just look very, very different and you'd have other clubs thriving? Or is that me, Andrew, being far too idealistic and everything's going to be okay kind of thing?
Sorry, Andrew.
Well, you can go on if you want.
I'll just quickly say I don't think any other competitions will survive after this. I mean, I know the Bundesliga clubs and PSG and other French clubs have rejected to join this thing. I think Porto have said they've rejected it as well. There's no way that Bayern Munich survive with this Super League existing. There's no way the Bundesliga exists. There's no way Liga 1 exists. There's no way the Premier League continues to exist. They could perhaps try to coexist, but because of the sheer amount of money that these clubs in the Super League will apparently have, they'll just hoard all these players. I know you could say, well, there's always more players, but really can't exaggerate the fact that clubs like Chelsea and Manchester City, they're more than happy to buy players that they have no intention of playing and loaning them out to these clubs. So, UEFA might try and continue rambling on, or might continue going. Premier League might kick these 6 players out and try and, continue building the competition. But it's the fact that the money in these leagues and these competitions will just nosedive for the most part. And that's the issue. You can't have UEFA or the Champions League, which currently makes about £3.5 billion a year from TV revenue. You can't have that and the Super League coexisting. It's just, there's only so much money that these TV companies can pay because there's only so many people that watch their shows. So, I know BT have made a big song and dance about this thing, and they say they disagree with it. But if you want to just use them as an example, if this Super League goes ahead, it's not as if BT will continue paying X hundred millions of pounds a year for Champions League, and then another company will come along and offer the same amount for the Super League, and everyone will continue making more money. It's going to be one or the other. And the problem is that even though Celtic and Rangers maybe aren't frequent members of the Champions League or other teams, it's the fact that the money does kind of flow down. I don't mean in the sense like a trickle down thing. I mean quite literally with UEFA. Like there's literally as much money as UEFA makes. Like I think 90% of the money they make gets handed back to football federations in competition prize money and things like that. So there's just no way that if the Super League goes ahead, the Champions League will continue existing, or the Europa League, or the UEFA Conference League. I don't even think things like the Premier League or anything will exist either. And if there's no Premier League and there's no Championship, that means Hibs have no one to sell their players to. This is a very simplistic thing. I don't just mean Hibs, obviously, but every club in Scottish football depends on the current market to finance itself. I'm going to cut myself off. I'm going on another rant here. You can tell how passionate I feel about this, but I just don't see any of these competitions coexisting with the Super League.
Yeah, what do you think about that, Andrew? I mean, the other thing, obviously, as well, is I think it's 4.6 billion that JP Morgan apparently would pay to be sponsors of that Super League. And the other thing on top of that is that even if these clubs were to stay in the Premier League, like Stefan says, I suppose the other kind of outcome of them having so much money is that they'd be able to buy all the best players. So it means they've got even more of an advantage in their domestic leagues if they were allowed to stay, which would be unlikely. And then also, even if they didn't finish in the top 10, even, they're still going to be in what would be viewed as the premier competition, so it really takes a competitive element away as well.
Yeah, so the first keg I put in the Perfect Staff was the Stella keg, and it was really nice. The European football thing, the notion that you take these 12 clubs plus whoever the other 3 are going to be, you take them away, what impact that's going to have on Scottish clubs in Europe. And I'm kind of answering a question that you asked about 5 minutes ago here, but it's not really going to make much effect on our clubs anyway and how we're going to do in Europe, because well, maybe for Rangers and Celtic, but when I'm thinking about Scottish football, I'm thinking about Scottish football as a whole. We've just started a third European competition, which when it was launched, well, when it was initially mooted, we all thought, this is finally a competition that's going to give the likes of Aberdeen, Hibs, Hearts a chance to actually go further in Europe. Now, obviously, the way it's working, it looks like whoever finishes third is going to get to Europe till Christmas, right? But that's one club. The clubs finishing fourth and fifth still have very, very little chance of actually getting through the qualifiers. We've actually launched a third competition that is going to give very little benefit to Scottish clubs. And even now, you've still got clubs who will go into the Champions League qualifiers and can still drop as low as the UEFA Conference League. So, this is the whole UEFA structure. And obviously, we've just got this new Champions League thing. Plans been announced as well. None of that helps Scottish football. And I'm actually surprised at the lack of anger over that. Everyone's kind of, it's almost a hypocrisy around it. Everyone's angry at this Super League thing. My only surprise of the whole thing is that it's the big clubs that have actually broken away and done something, and it's not actually your Aberdeens and your Rosenborgs and stuff who have actually thought, oh, we need to do something. We've been talking about it in the Atlantic League for years, and no one's ever pushed away with it. And there was talk within the past few months, actually the past year, about the Atlantic League, and then Celtic pulled out. And the reason Celtic pulled out is because they will come out and they will criticise the Champions League reforms because it doesn't help them. They will come out and they will criticise the Super League. Yet already yesterday there was talk that if this happens and if these 6 teams leave the English Premier League, maybe Rangers and Celtic will join the English Premier League, and you will have Rangers and Celtic complaining about all these reforms and how it's bad for football, and then they will get an invite to the English Premiership, the English Premier League, and they will go like a flash, and they won't care about Scottish football. So it's just the whole hypocrisy. The talk of if Liverpool are playing Real Madrid 4 times a season or twice a season or constantly, that fixture is not going to be as it's going to lose something. From yet we push Scottish football. We have the Rangers and Celtic playing each other at least 4 times a season, 5 times this season. You've got the UEFA president coming out and saying clubs like Rangers and Celtic are needed in Europe, yet he's squeezed them out of the Champions League. You've got the Real Madrid president saying that this is needed to save football because apparently kids are losing interest in football. I've not seen any evidence of that, kids losing interest in football. All I've seen is kids losing interest in the local clubs and buying Real Madrid strips. So I don't know where he's getting that from. But for me, I just think this should be the catalyst now for Scottish clubs and the counterparts in Norway, Denmark, Sweden to say, listen, European competition, even if this Super League doesn't work, even if it gets cancelled and we continue with the 3 competitions, it's still not working for Scottish clubs. And we should be looking to go and do something else in not just for the 2 or 3 clubs outside the Old Firm that are going to qualify for Europe, but for the whole league. You've got the one that really hit home for me was when Inverness won the Scottish Cup. That was 2015, was it? And they'd never been in Europe before. They finally qualified for Europe, and they got 2 games. They played, I think it was Cluj. They played them home and away, and that was it. End of your European adventure. And there's other examples as well of clubs that finally qualify for Europe. They get 2 games and they're out, and it's just like, what's the point? Like, what have they really gained from that? And I think we should be looking maybe at this Atlantic League. I don't have a problem with European leagues. My problem is when there was talk of them replacing domestic football, leaving Scottish football to join a European league. That was my worry. But if it's a domestic league running alongside a European league with guaranteed European football all season, I've got no problem with that. And I'm just amazed that the smaller clubs, if you like, are sitting back and kind of tweeting away about, this is a disgrace, this is killing football. Like, go and do something. Let Real Madrid and Inter Milan eat themselves to death.
I mean, what would you suggest though? Would you suggest just as in create their own league? What do you think would be the best solution? Like, if you're an Aberdeen fan, right, what would you think? Because I feel we're kind of through the looking glass here, where I kind of agree to an extent what you're saying is everyone seems very self-serving. Do you know what I mean? Like, everyone is wanting to say the right thing, but there's a lot of kind of hypocrisy going on, whether all of it is intentional or not.
Well, I'll say it in brief because this is my newsletter for Thursday. My idea, right, which I'm going to pitch to Dave Colmack, and I'm pretty sure he'll be down for it, is Scotland, Norway, Denmark, Sweden, Holland, and Belgium. That's six leagues. All of them six top team, all their top flights move to a 16-team league and play each other twice, so 30 games. Then, depending on where you finish in your league, so say the top two, they will join the top two of all the other 5 leagues, and that creates Division A. And that means your Rangers and Celtic, they still get their 4 Old Firm games this season because they'll play each other twice in Scotland and they'll play each other twice in this European League. And likewise, it goes down. The reason it's every top flight has to have the same number of teams is because it will go down the whole division. So even your Hamilton and your Livingstones, they'll play in a league with the teams that have finished in the same positions in all the leagues. So everyone will go into a 12-team division and they'll play 22 European games and 30 Scottish games, and you'll still have the Scottish Cup. I'll obviously go into it more in depth.
I think you've definitely given enough there.
But for me, I just think, like, we're going, let's qualify for the Europa League and play 4 qualifiers and then get knocked out. Let's just join up with an Atlantic League and have 22 games guaranteed. And actually, I worked out what Aberdeen's league would be, based on the teams that generally finish in 3rd and 4th in these leagues. So Aberdeen would have us, Hibs, Anderlecht, Genk, AZ Alkmaar, Feyenoord, Gothenburg, Stockholm, Rosenborg, Viking Stavanger, Copenhagen, Brøndby. Sign me up for that.
Is it as easy as that, Stefan, or are we kind of taking money out of it a wee bit is the only thing? And I guess before I let you answer, I'm going to go through that revamped Champions League format before we run out of time, or we talk a bit more. But basically what has happened is it's now it's going to be a 36-team Champions League from 2024. That'll run until at least 2033. I'm guessing if it's a shambles, then they'll get rid of it after that. But basically, as I said, it's going to be made up of 36 clubs, which will take part in an expanded, in quotation marks, first phase, which is kind of replacing the existing group stage, which is groups made up of 4 teams. It's now one big league, and all clubs will play 10 opponents of kind of differing strengths and quality. And then from there, the top 8 in that league, I hope you're still following me, the top 8 in that league advances to the knockout rounds. Then the 16 clubs after them play each other in a playoff for the remaining 8 slots in that knockout round. Simple, right? I think one of the things people are upset about, though, is 4 slots for the competition will be allocated on the basis of past performance. So clubs that have a high UEFA coefficient but haven't qualified for the Champions League, but maybe qualified for a Europa League or a Europa Conference, for example, which would mean, I'm guessing, if you look at the leagues this season, like a Liverpool, if they were to miss out in the top 4, is weighted in their favour. So I guess then, Stefan, my other question would be, along with, is Andrew's idea great in practice, but maybe we're forgetting about the money ruining everything else? But my other question would be, is this actually just a lesser of 2 evils, this revamped Champions League? Because again, it's kind of helping the bigger clubs. Yeah, the super clubs will say it's going to be shared, all the money amongst more clubs, but really it seems to be weighted again to Premier teams.
Yeah, I think I quite like the idea that Andrew came up with there, but one of the big things he's missed out on is that all the teams he's mentioned in Aberdeen's league are exactly the teams that Aberdeen consistently fail to beat in qualifiers for these said Europa League group stages, which is sick of watching Aberdeen fail to qualify from.
Can I just jump in there? I think we'll find we knocked out Viking Stavanger in the qualifiers this season.
Okay, right. So you'll finish second bottom in that league, is that what you're saying?
Last time we played a Dutch team, we knocked them out. That was Gonjan.
Right, okay. Well. Anyway, I mean, the thing is that I don't know where to start with Andrew's thing, or to just go straight into this Champions League, to be perfectly honest with you. I mean, I actually don't. I mean, I did see some of the talk with Celtic and Rangers using this opportunity to join the Premier League. I think that's just kind of lazy journalism, to be perfectly honest with you, or even just lazy blogging or writing. I don't think, I don't think UEFA are going to respond to these kind of super clubs ripping themselves out from their domestic leagues and destroying the legitimacy of the domestic competitions by ripping Celtic and Rangers out of their domestic league and destroying the legitimacy of Scottish football. I think it's just a really easy thing to write up when just about anything happens with the changing structures of European football. I still don't think it's happening at all, to be perfectly honest with you. In terms of the reformed Champions League, yeah, no, this is an issue because it's definitely not a good thing for Scottish football. If I wasn't convinced that these guys at these super clubs weren't complete idiots, and having watched Fiorentino Perez, that's the name of the Real Madrid president, interview yesterday, I am convinced they're absolute idiots. I would think these guys might be playing kind of 4D chess while we're all running around playing Scrabble here, because the perfect way to kind of usher in these changes to the Champions League would have been for these big clubs to kind of make a big song and dance about this absolutely horrendous competition that they want to push through. And then at the 11th hour, UEFA say, look, they'll settle down if we give them this, and that for the Champions League. And then everyone says, "Oh, good, right? As long as we keep them, as long as Super League doesn't happen, we can live with this new Champions League format." I honestly, for a while yesterday when I watched all this happening, I did think that might be the case, but I'm now convinced that these clubs are just full of idiots. But that doesn't change the fact that this new Champions League format isn't great. I mean, I'm kind of tempted to kind of say I'm not as worried about it, just because simple fact that the Champions League has probably changed its format about 6 or 7 times since it came into, it was born in the early 90s, and it was born as the brainchild of Berlusconi of all people. So it's not as if the Champions League has kind of been this high watermark for exceptional competition, or this kind of wonderful thing that can't even say the words. This competition that kind of shares the wealth and is there for everyone to take part in fairly. And I've no doubt that it could probably quite easily change as well. I mean, let's remember that. At least we forget that once upon a time it used to have back-to-back group stages before they decided to cancel that and go back to normal knockout rounds because they're more interesting. So, I'm not entirely. I'm not hugely worried about the Champions League changing its format. And when I look through it, I'm like, yeah, it does mean more games for the big teams to play each other. It does mean probably a greater strain on these clubs and any other clubs that take part in it, because it's more midweek games. And if this was a kind of normal season, we'd probably be moaning about an ever increasing weight of matches in the football schedule for the season. But it's not a closed off competition. It's not. They haven't pulled up the ladder behind them. Even though we have kind of talked about these these extra places for these kind of safety net position qualifying spots for clubs. I was actually reading it before we came on the podcast. I like some of these rules might actually benefit Scottish football at one point, because one of the spots is reserved for the highest ranking league champion, the league champion with the highest coefficient that didn't qualify. And sure, you go through the top 6 or 7 leagues at that point, but the way Scottish football's playing right now, that could actually mean Celtic or Rangers at one point. So and obviously, the expanded league, they're not taking, as far as I can tell, they're not taking qualification spots away from Scottish football. I was also reading that this will also mean an expansion of the Europa League and the Europa Conference League to do something similar. So they'll have big league placements, which might actually make these competitions more interesting, because if you are a team like Aberdeen and you're going into the Europa League, I know Andrew doesn't seem very optimistic, but I'm optimistic that Aberdeen qualify for the Europa League group stages one day. If they get into it, instead of playing 4 teams or 5 teams, they will go into a league with, I think, 16 or 32 teams. So, if you're an Aberdeen fan, you can maybe get like 8 or 9 different away days out of that competition. So I'm not here to defend it and say, UEFA's brilliant, Super League's bad. It's black and white. Of course, it's not black and white. Nothing in life or football is black and white. But its Champions League reform is much better for Scottish football on the whole than obviously the Super League idea. And I'm intrigued to see how it plays out as well. I mean, I think it's impossible to really tell what happens going forward if these clubs do kind of back down and rejoin UEFA or the ECA and agree to continue taking part in the Champions League or not. But I can definitely live with these Champions League reforms. But I'm honestly convinced if the Super League goes ahead, then it's the end of football as we know it.
I agree with you in terms of I can live with them, but I also do think there's a kind of I think Andrew pointed to it. It's people. I think a lot of people probably just anything in comparison to that closed off league seems decent at the moment. But yeah, I know what you're saying. I guess this to kind of slightly change pace before we wrap things up. I thought the other thing that was quite interesting was, Andrew, is this maybe a catalyst as well for? I'm not saying this will happen. And knowing how the SPFL are and have been recently, but is this a catalyst really for us to try and change how we market and share our game, and just to tell people what makes it great? I mean, it feels like this is a great time to be, I don't know, jumping on a bandwagon and really shouting about how we're pretty much the complete opposite of everything that's wrong here, or could be wrong with this closed off Super League.
Well, it's not going to come from the current idiots in charge. We've seen from the past year that there's absolutely no leadership there. Actually, it's supposed to be getting announced an hour ago, wasn't it? Is Mike Mulroney, is he not applying to be FIFA vice president or something? How did he get on? Because that's what football needs. Mike Mulroney running things.
Yeah, Mike Mulroney has defeated the FA of Wales president. No, sorry, I'm telling a lie. The Irish FA president has been elected the FIFA vice president role. So Mike Mulroney will not be FIFA's vice president.
Well, I mean, that's a blow for football. I mean, talking about football being over as we know it, that's the beginning of the end. What's Scottish football going to do here? Look at what's happened in the past year, where last summer we had court cases and stuff because we were just chucking teams down a league, and people won divisions and we weren't going to promote them, and teams are getting relegated after when they still had a chance to stay up. And then we've got Neil Doncaster coming out and saying, this Super League's a bit elitist, isn't it? Listen, Scottish football just cares about itself. We've got Rangers Celtic who will come out and say the right things, but they will now be thinking, right, where's our opportunity? And if there's 6 places going in the English Premier League, they'll be away. You'll have Dave Cormack talking about an Atlantic League, and it probably won't be the Atlantic League that I've just suggested. He'll come up with a completely different one, probably a rubbish one.
Can I just jump in there, by the way? I hate that it's called the Atlantic League. It should be called the North Sea League because it encapsulates clubs that are based around the North Sea. If it would be called the Atlantic League if we were forming a league with the MLS.
Right.
That's just my point. That's just my
point. North Sea League makes it sound like some sort of. Makes it sound like the Highland League.
It just sounds like Cove and Aberdeen play 5 times a season.
Well, maybe they will. Maybe that'll be what Aberdeen do. Maybe Aberdeen will have an Atlantic League with Atlanta.
Oh, good God! Listen, if the Super League goes ahead, that's what Scottish football will be reduced to: just Cove Rangers and Aberdeen playing each other over and over again.
To answer your question, will there be a revolution? No, because all the good people in Scottish football are not the ones that run it.
There we go, Stefan. Anything to add to that? That was pretty savage, Andrew.
I would just, if anyone's, I can understand why Scottish football fans would struggle to care about this thing, but I think we have to be vigilant against it. I think when it comes to time, we have to protest against it, just like I'm sure Liverpool, Chelsea, Arsenal fans and stuff down south will be doing. And yeah, I really think it's something we have to keep an eye on. It's something we have to put pressure on the governing bodies of Scottish football to continue working against and things like that. So yeah, I'm really hopeful, and I really hope, rather, I'm not hopeful. I hope that the Super League doesn't go ahead, and the way things will be looking, I'm actually beginning to wonder if it's beginning to crack at the seams. But it's a worrying period, no doubt about it.
Just before we wrap things up, there's actually a great piece that James has done on the website this week about just how Neil Doncaster should really be looking closer to home before slagging off the Super League. I completely recommend reading it. It's a great read. And with that in mind as well, Stefan, you've done a piece which kindly isn't about the Super League, so people would like a wee palate cleanser, a depressing palate cleanser on that, on why we're going to struggle without Ryan Jack at the Euros. That's also on the website as well, which is a really, really good read as well. So, and later in the week, Andrew's kind of giving you a tease there of his plans, so there'll be a newsletter on that, and we'll be back on Friday with an extra podcast as well, so don't miss that. Also, I kind of say this at the end of every podcast, but it really does help if you leave reviews on Apple Podcasts or recommend us to your friends. We'd really appreciate it. Cheers.